Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for coming out in the freezing cold. My name is Jeannie Brown. I'm the Historical Society current president, and I just want to give you a little bit of background. We decided to try to somehow celebrate the diversity of Long Beach citizenry for its for its growth. And we started back in, so we wanted to work with the library. And thank you, Eliza Hornblast. Stand up. Yes. Okay.
Thank you for coming.
Okay. And we have had an evening with Hispanic, Latino people in. When did we do that? October. And then we did Irish Heritage in November. And we're doing Jewish Heritage now, as you know. And we're doing African American in February 11th. It will be coming. So I hope you'll all come to that. The format tonight is each speaker will have about 10 to 12 minutes to speak, no interruptions. Okay, we're not doing questions now or contributions, but we wanted you to just to understand. We know that the 5 speakers are not necessarily, the history of Long Beach. However, it's the oral histories, and to get the idea is to try to get a taste of some of, what it was like growing up in Long Beach, which again is so diverse. We all grew up. If you grew up, how many of you grew up here? Oh, wow, okay, a lot. Okay, so me too. So, and it is a very diverse community, which you don't always find. And it's one of the things that we should celebrate, I believe, especially the Historical Society. So that's, where we are tonight. And I'm going to take the time to let you know that the Historical Society, first of all, we're welcoming the 4th graders for tours of our museum and as part of our education mission this week and last week. And thank you, Lynn, okay, who's in charge of that. And we are having an art exhibit on February 1st and 2nd. And of course, you're all invited to the museum. We have about 6 or 7 artists exhibiting their work, and local artists. So we hope you come to that. Okay, so everyone will introduce themselves, okay, when they come up. It's not necessary for me to introduce them. Okay, so I hope you enjoy the evening. And this will be videotaped, so people who are away in Florida, okay, will be able to view it in a couple of weeks, okay? Thanks very much. Our first speaker will be
Good evening, everybody. My name is Ricky Ehrlich. I moved here in 1963, and it's good to see some people I know for many, many years, and also all the newcomers. It's good to see you, too. So I wrote down so that I wouldn't have to think too much about what I wanted to say. I thought about it pretty much all day today, just here and there, just thinking, how can I express what it was to be Jewish growing up in Long Beach? So it's not a masterpiece, but it's my little take on growing up here in Long Beach as a Jewish person. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming out on this frigid night to celebrate Jewish culture in Long Beach. My father's best friend, Alan Katz, would visit his mother in Long Beach in the late 50s and early 60s, and my dad would sometimes go with him. He started falling in love with Long Beach and finally bought a house on East Market between Long Beach Road and Riverside. When we moved here in 1963, it felt like Long Beach was the best kept secret in the world. How could so few people know about this place? How could we have the whole beach practically to ourselves? In those early years, we played two-hand touch football in the street and hardly ever had to stop for a car going by. Nowadays, my block down near Washington Boulevard looks like a highway sometimes. Too many people taking it to avoid the lights on Park. My parents enrolled me at the Hebrew Academy on Washington Boulevard and Broadway, and I went there from 3rd grade through 8th. I learned how to play basketball in the schoolyard there, right next to the boardwalk. I also attended yeshiva in 9th grade at a place called Highline on Seagirt Boulevard in Far Rockaway. Every once in a while, my friend and I would walk over to the Wavecrest Deli when we stayed late for basketball practice. After that year, I wanted to venture out more into the secular world, and my parents were okay with it. I started attending Long Beach High in 10th grade, and I loved it. My older brother Bobby made the transition easier for me because he had left yeshiva after 7th grade, so I didn't enter the new environment completely cold. Unfortunately, the neighborhood where we lived started to deteriorate, so my parents decided to sell our house and moved to Woodmere in 1973. I had to attend Lawrence High School for my senior year, but that didn't stop me from coming to Long Beach every weekend on my Atala racing bike. During those 10 years I lived in Long Beach with my family, I always accompanied my father to the Young Israel on Long Beach Road. Back then, Rabbi Rotman was in charge, and he was the one who officiated at my bar mitzvah in 1969. Even though I wasn't particularly religious, I remember loving the sermons he gave every Sabbath. It was clear he really believed in what he was saying. He wasn't a politician, and he wasn't someone who just played the game. He was one of the first great teachers I ever had, along with my English teacher at the Hebrew Academy, Mrs. Meschenberg, who's here tonight, by the way. Mrs. Meschenberg. You know, when you have a really great teacher, it makes all the difference, as we all know. It's important to have someone like that, besides your parents, when you're young and impressionable. Someone who's 100% real, someone you can trust, someone who inspires. Mrs. Meschenberg, thank you. On one of several trips I made to Israel over the years, I visited Rabbi Rotman and his family. He had moved there in the early 70s. My bar mitzvah took place at the Jackson Hotel on Broadway. It's the same building that now houses the Long Beach Hotel. Even though my father came from an Orthodox home, we grew up kind of in between secular and religious. My mother had come from a completely non-religious home, and there was a nice balance in our house. I didn't think too much about my Jewishness until I went away to college at the end of 1974. I guess when your parents send you to yeshiva for 9 years, you don't really have a chance to embrace Judaism on your own. But being far away from home, especially in a town that had not a single temple, made me get in touch with my heritage in a way I hadn't felt before. I remember during my high school years in Long Beach, I'd be partying with my friends at one of their houses down west on weekends. And I'd start to head out the door at 11:30 at night or so, and they'd make fun of me, saying, "Come on, the night is young. Where are you going, Ehrlich?" And I'd say something like, "I have track practice in the morning," or "I'm going to temple with my father in the morning." They'd shake their heads as though I were crazy, wondering what tomorrow had to do with tonight. It's hard to separate one's Jewishness from the rest of my experiences in Long Beach. Everything in our lives is so interconnected. But I do have 2 especially pleasant Jewish Long Beach memories, both of which coincidentally have to do with the holiday of Sukkot, the holiday celebrating the Exodus from Egypt, the holiday when you see Jewish people walking around with palm fronds in their hands. It's traditional to shake the frond in all 4 directions to wish for peace and good things for all people. Every year when the holiday of Sukkot came around, my father would drive me and my brother Bobby down into Lido, or even farther, onto the Loop Parkway, where we'd pull off onto the shoulder and cut down reeds for the roof of our sukkah. Jewish law requires that the shelter be a temporary one, in remembrance of the journey the Israelites made from their enslavement in Egypt to the promised land of Israel. The roof of the sukkah was supposed to be something really temporary, something through which you could see the stars. The reeds were perfect for this. One year, we had so many bundles of them, the trunk wouldn't close. My father allowed me to ride in there and hold it partly closed as we made the short trip back to East Market. Regulations weren't so tight back then for municipalities or for parents. Nowadays, Dad would have been arrested, and I would have been taken in by Child Protective Services. But it's a fond memory I have with me now forever, and I don't regret the experience for a second. My father was a good driver. He went slowly that day, and I always felt safe with him at the wheel. The other pleasant memory, Long Beach Jewish memory, is this. One year, we were putting up the sukkah on the Friday before the holiday. We misjudged the time and had to head for temple. We planned to finish on Sunday. The next morning, when we got back from Sabbath services, we found our next-door neighbor just finishing putting up our sukkah. He was not Jewish, and he had not said a word to us about his intentions. He simply got his tools and finished the job. This was way back when we had very little money and couldn't afford those prefab sukkahs. We just put together whatever scrap wood we had in the garage and or visited whitbreads if necessary. I remember this neighbor was an old Russian guy with long, flowing white hair. He hardly spoke a word of English. The only contact we'd have with him during the year was when our basketball went over his fence and we were too afraid of him to retrieve it. But this kind Christian man did a beautiful thing for our family that day, and I've never forgotten it. On the other side of the coin, being Jewish can be difficult in places where people practice prejudice and hate more than tolerance and love, but that's not Long Beach. I never had a single anti-Semitic incident here, except for one. My brother and I had gone over to the old Central School playground to play basketball with our cousins who were visiting. My cousins are Orthodox, and they were wearing yarmulkes, skull caps. We were playing on our own for a while, but then a bunch of kids came over and asked if we wanted to play a game with them. We politely declined, but they kept insisting in a very rough and threatening manner. We very politely explained that we just wanted to shoot around. We didn't want to get into a game. All of a sudden, this one skinny kid punched me right in the side of my face. There were dozens of kids in the playground, and it was clear that we were singled out because of my cousin's yarmulkes. One of them said, "What's the matter, Jew boy? We're not good enough for you?" I decided not to fight back because there were too many of them, and it was obvious they would gang up on us if we did. It was a very frightening experience and was also humiliating. I knew I could have taken the kid on my own, but I felt it would have been a disaster if I hit him back. That was the only time my Jewishness presented a problem for me in all the 60 years I've lived here. Harvey Wiesenberg, who's also here tonight, was always someone I looked up to as a kid, and I still do. My dad was a great father in many ways, but after serving in the Marines and being in fantastic shape as a young man, he started getting heavier and heavier every year. He taught me many important things, but the one thing he could not teach me was how to stay in shape. Guys like Harvey Wiesenberg and Randy Dodd over at the Rec were role models for me in that department. Later on, when I moved back to Long Beach after college, Harvey became an inspiration for me in other ways as well. I thought it was wonderful the way he would get up every year at the Kristallnacht commemoration at City Hall and speak out, not only on behalf of Jews, but on behalf of all peace-loving people, especially the people of Long Beach, who have always been very accepting and supportive of all religions and cultures. I too felt Harvey's pride in being part of a community that embraced everyone, that respected everyone. These days, I sometimes attend the Chabad of the Beaches temple down on the 500 block of West Walnut. Rabbi Goodman is a great leader, and he also praises Long Beach all the time for the support and warmth that the town extends to its Jewish community. I'll be 69 in March, and I feel very fortunate to have lived here almost without interruption from the time I was 8 years old. Except for that one incident at Central School, I have never felt a single drop of anti-Semitism living here. On the contrary, I've had great times, great friends, and a great life here. Another inspiring moment for me as a Jewish person living in Long Beach was when our City Council President, Brendan Finn, spoke just recently at the latest Kristallnacht ceremony in November. It was like a breath of fresh air to hear Mr. Finn, who is not Jewish, speak so beautifully about the Jews and about the state of Israel, particularly when so many people, both here in the U.S. and around the world, were spreading incendiary lies about us to advance their own selfish agendas. I am encouraged by his example to conclude my remarks this evening with the following. On this night, when we celebrate Jewish culture, we must not close our eyes to what is going on in the world. Just a few days ago, when the deal was arranged between Israel and Hamas to free the hostages, I was very confused and uneasy. Of course, I wanted these innocent Jews to be freed, but I wondered if freeing convicted murderers from Israeli jails was the right way to go. I emailed my cousin Barbara, who lives in Jerusalem, and asked what she and her neighbors, friends, and relatives thought of the deal. She sent me the following paragraph, written by a man far more articulate than I, by way of response. Here's what that man wrote. The decision by the Israeli government to make significant concessions to the Hamas kidnappers should never be called a deal. It was extortion. The kidnapping was a crime, and the extortionate demand was an additional crime. So the proper description of what occurred is that Israel, pressured by the United States, capitulated to the unlawful and extortionate demands of Hamas as the only way of saving the lives of kidnapped babies, mothers, and other innocent, mostly civilian hostages. This was not the result of a negotiation between equals. The terrorists are not constrained by morality, law, or truth. When a terrorist group negotiates, quote unquote, with a democracy, it always has the upper hand. If every democratic nation adopted a policy of never negotiating with terrorists, it might discourage terrorism. But every nation submits to the demands of kidnappers and extortionists, so terrorism and hostage-taking have become a primary tactic of the worst people in the world, and the rest of us are complicit. Especially complicit, with blood on their hands, are supporters of Hamas on university campuses who chant for intifada and revolution. Also complicit are international organizations, such as the International Criminal Court, that treat Israel and Hamas as equals. Let us put the blame for all the deaths in Gaza where it belongs, on Hamas and the useful idiots and useless bigots who support murderous terrorists. May we continue to enjoy brotherhood and peace here in our home, Long Beach. Thank you.
My name is Phyllis Wagner. I was born here, and my family goes back in Long Beach all the way to 1926. That's a lot longer. I'm old, but I'm not that old. It was my grandparents, Goldie and Israel Rockmill, who came here with my mother, who was a girl, and her two younger brothers, who were much younger. And they came here because my mother had had a ruptured appendix. And in those days, in 1925, when her appendix ruptured, you basically died if you had peritonitis. It was about a 90 to 95% rate of death. And they believed in sea air. The Long Beach sea air would cure her. And well, obviously it did, because she was a girl at the time. She was 12, and I wouldn't be here telling you this if it hadn't. And my grandparents came. They rented a place somewhere on June Walk. I have no idea where. And they fell in love with Long Beach, as most people do. My grandfather loved to swim, so he was out in the ocean all the time that summer. And my grandmother loved to be on the beach. She wasn't a swimmer. Women in those days very often weren't. But they loved Long Beach, and they built a house right here. You've all passed it. It's on Magnolia Boulevard, right next to Rock and Olive. It's 308 Magnolia. And they were there for the rest of their lives. There was only one synagogue in Long Beach in the 1920s. Do you all know what it is? Which synagogue that was? Anybody? Temple Israel. Temple Israel. No, Temple Zion was 1948. Only one. It just celebrated its 100th anniversary about 2 years ago. And everybody who was Jewish, and my grandparents were Orthodox, belonged to Temple Israel. And that is where my parents were married by the rabbi, Rabbi Golovensky, I believe his name was. He was the second rabbi of Temple Israel. And that's where my uncles were born. Am I touching something? I'm sorry. Sounds like a riot going on down there. Anyway, they lived there. They lived on Magnolia, and they always went to Temple Israel. My brother was born at the very beginning of World War II. My father was drafted He served in the military, in the U.S. Army, in the artillery. He rose to become an officer, a warrant officer in Europe, and he loved the Army. But when he came back, they settled in Long Beach, where my mother was living the whole time anyway. And they were living on Graham Boulevard and Westchester Street in an apartment in a two-family house. And they, at some point, became members of the second synagogue in Long Beach. Does anyone know which one that was? That's a little harder. Bethel. Yes. Temple Bethel, at the corner of Lindale Boulevard and West Walnut Street. Eventually, when I was about 4, my parents had a house built. Long Beach was mostly empty lots in those days. They had a house built on the 500 block of West Olive Street. I didn't even have to cross a street to get to the Hebrew school or to go to services. And we were the post-war baby boomers. And there were a bajillion of us on the block. And almost everyone was Jewish. Not everyone. Those of you who've gone to school board meetings might know Pat Gallagher. He's the same age I am. We grew up together. And Pat is obviously not Jewish. There were a couple of others, but everybody got along. There was no anti-Semitism in our neighborhood at any rate. I spoke to my brother before coming here a few days ago. He's in Europe right now. And he's older than I am, and he went to West School. Excuse me. And he said most of the kids were Irish. There were some Jewish kids. There were very few Protestants, actually, in Long Beach in those days. Everybody was either Catholic or Jewish. And he said that there really was absolutely no anti-Semitism whatsoever. The only thing he could think of was he wanted to date a girl one time. She was very cute, and she went to Catholic school. And when he called up, her mother answered the phone, and she said to my brother, "I'm sorry, you can't go out with my daughter." But that's not anti-Semitism. That's just keeping your religion within the bounds. She was very nice to my brother. And he married a very nice woman eventually. Anyway, he was a teenager at the time. When I went to Long Beach School, public schools, they always said it was about 2/3 Jewish, and it was. I took Hebrew. I went to Bethel Hebrew School, but at Long Beach High School. It was very different than it is today. There was very little diversity in Long Beach in those days. If you look at my mother's yearbook, she graduated in the class of 1930. You will see everybody is either Irish, Jewish, a few Italians, and that's it. There were a couple, I mean, there were 30 kids in the whole class, so we're not talking a large number of people. But there were no black people, there were no Hispanics, no Asians of any kind. This was Long Beach, and very, very few white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, in all honesty. Anyway, when I was a teenager, I joined the Bach, which is, Bachuri Chemed is the name of the synagogue. It's on Edwards Boulevard between between Beach and Olive, right? And it was, Bachuri, it means youth, a young man or a young woman. And when I joined in the early 60s, there was no rabbi, there never had been one at that point, and there was no cantor. There was a director. His name was Simon Solomon. He was, to me, he was elderly. He was probably 50. He was a lovely, lovely, kind gentleman. He was just so nice, and what he did was the boys who went to public school, which was most of the boys in the synagogue, the teenagers, and he taught them how to read the Torah, how to learn. He taught them how to lead the services, how to daven, and that was it. There was no synagogue politics whatsoever, at least among the young people. There were the Bach Juniors, which were the teenagers and the Bach seniors, who were anybody past teenager age. They were the nicest people. I made many friends. I loved them. They were terrific. Then I went to college, got married, and my husband got into University of Pennsylvania, and we were there for about almost 7 years. And we had our first child, my son Michael, and we came back to Long Beach. And by then, my family, my father was never among the synagogue goers of this world, never. But my mother went every week, and her name is Thelma Diamond, and she had by that point gone back to Temple Israel from Bethel, where she had belonged. And I went with her, with Michael. I'd bring him, and the three of us would go to Temple Israel, and the women were as nice as could be. Unfortunately, I noticed that I was the youngest woman. The second youngest woman was my mother, who was I was in my late 20s, she was in her early 60s, because all the other women tended to be in their 80s and 90s. And then one day I met a friend I had been friends with. Her name's Elsa. Her maiden name was Arditi, which is a Sephardic Jewish name. Sephard means Spain in Hebrew, and it's the Jews who were thrown out of Spain and settled in the Mediterranean. And this synagogue on Penn Street and Lafayette was established just after World War II, as all the other synagogues were. Congregation Beth Shalom, the Bach, Temple Emanu-El, Young Israel, Temple Zion. They were all established after World War II, when the Long Beach population went into double digits in terms of thousands. And so I met Elsa one day. We had been friends when we were young, and she had her son Michael in a stroller. I had my son Michael in a stroller, and we reconnected, and she invited me to the Sephardic congregation. And the people who had founded it were originally mostly from Turkey, and also from Greece. There's one of the descendants right there. And also the Rabbi Avitan, was the most welcoming man you'd ever want to meet. If you were a man, he would call you up for honors the first time you went there. He was just so nice to everyone. And when I first got there, a man named Joe Ezrati, very nice man, was the president. But then we got a new president, Dave Altave, who really went out of his way to welcome young families. And there, instead of being the only woman under 60, I was surrounded with people who were young and who had children, and I was there for over 44 years, 45 years. Rabbi Avitan passed away in February of 2006, and synagogue politics being what it was, I left the synagogue a few years ago, and now I attend back to where I started. I went to Hebrew school at Temple Bethel, and now I am at the Chabad of the Beaches, which is the same building, physical building. The politicians, I just want a few things. I know Jerry Kremer knows more about politics than I do at Long Beach. Oh, yes, you do. And I remember in Temple Israel, it was where all the Jewish politicians went, not just Democrats, which ruled the city, because that's what it was. It was mostly Democratic. Sorry. But there was a man named Phil Kohut. I don't know how many of you ever heard of Phil Kohut? Oh, just a few? Okay, Phil Kohut ran Long Beach with an iron fist. He was corrupt. He was totally corrupt.
Yes.
And we all knew it. I'll give you one very brief story, then I'll finish up, Jeannie. And Phil didn't have any children of his own. And he had a brother who had, I believe they had 6, is it 6 or 5? 1 girl, 5 boys, or 1 girl, 4 boys, something like that. One of the boys was Eddie, who was in my class from kindergarten through 12th grade. And Eddie used to ride his bike to school. And we went to school right here at the corner. It was Central School. It's now an apartment house. And there was in front on Park Avenue, painted no parking. And they painted a rectangle around it. Well, we were allowed to go out for lunch when you were in the older grades, not kindergarten, but the older grades. And I went out with my friends one day, and we were going to go across the street to get, we called them Chinese apples. They're known as pomegranates. I never liked them, but my friends all did, so I buy them also. And I came out, and I see Eddie's bike in the no parking zone. And I said to him, I teased him a little, and I said, Eddie, you're going to get a ticket. Your bike is in the no parking zone. And he was the class bully, and he said to me, he sneered at me, and he said, so what? If I get a ticket, my Uncle Phil will fix it. And you know what? He was 100% right, and I knew it. And he knew it too, because that's the way Phil operated. And when there was Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, normally in Temple Israel, the seating was separate, women on one side, men on the other. But for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, you buy seats, and in those days, they didn't have seats like you're sitting in now. They had benches, pews. And my grandfather would buy a whole row. So even though we were going to Bethel at the time, we'd go for the high holidays to Temple Israel. And directly in front of me was Phil Kohut. Not only did he go there, but also Hannah Kamenoff, who was a very decent, honest person. She was the Long Beach supervisor, and she had been on the Long Beach school board. And also Bob Kleiner, who was once Jerry Kremer's associate. He took over when Kohut kind of had to leave as head of the Democratic Party because they got him on the parking meter scandal. Those of you who lived in Long Beach in the 60s knew about the parking meter scandal. But Kohut was corrupt from when he was police commissioner back in the 1930s. Anyway, that was my story of Long Beach. I love Long Beach. It is not as Jewish as it used to be. There's a great deal more diversity, which I think is a wonderful thing. And I'm just happy to have been a part of it. And that's it.
Hello, I'm Fran Fleishman, and I see a lot of people that I know here in the audience, and I'm so happy to see you.
Fran, can I fix the microphone for you for a
Let's see,
second?
I don't think my story is that... Is that better? Thank you. Okay, I'm Fran Fleishman. Okay. I was born in the Bronx, and during the war, World War II, my father, who was a garment manufacturer, got a contract to make uniforms for the government. Needless to say, life was very good for us. We moved to a bigger apartment in the Bronx with an elevator in the building, which was a big deal. It was a very lovely neighborhood. We had contractors and decorators, and we went away every summer, the whole family. And that was really very special because my father got that contract. And at the end of the war, life changed. There was an influx of refugees in our beautiful little neighborhood. And then there was an influx of Puerto Ricans in this neighborhood. And on top of that, my brother and I were getting older. We had been sharing a bedroom. It was time for a bigger apartment. So my parents came up with the idea that if we moved to Long Beach, where we had spent 2 summers and they loved it, then we could have a bigger place, and that would include our summers. And little did they know how this was going to change our lives. We did move to Long Beach, and every single day my father came home from work, from the train, walked down to the beach and went for a swim. We lived on the beach, but we didn't come alone. We brought family. My 2 other uncles came and friends of the family. We were about 20 on the beach every day. Our job was, you had to clean up the house, someone had to make the lunches so we could be on the beach by 11 or 11:30. And that was our lives. But we didn't know that Long Beach had so much to offer. At the time that we came, there was Temple Israel, there was Temple Bethel, there was Zion, but at the same time, Temple Emanu-El was meeting in the Masonic Temple, looking to create and build their own synagogue. And East End Temple was meeting in a storefront on between Roosevelt and Neptune on Park Avenue, looking to build another synagogue. There were more and more Jews coming because the city had changed. And it was a wonderful life. I'm trying to think of besides all the religious institutions, there were stores that had a Jewish tom, like the Delicacy Shop, and Pincus, and Bornstein's Bakery, and Hiddleman's Bakery, and Natel's Bakery. All of these things were a big draw, and my family loved it. And what happened was that our lives changed completely. We joined Temple Emanu-El, and my father was a member of the board. I think he was a secretary, because I used to have to type his notes. My mother was on the sisterhood board. She was in charge of decorating the niches every month. My brother was bar mitzvah, and my brother and I joined the youth group. We would go to the youth group every night. Then, to top it all off, I married the cantor. So we were very much involved in Temple Emanu-El. And when you told the story about the lulav and the etrog, I remember after services he brought them home, and we would take the girls to the beach and they would shake them in all 4 directions. And that was a wonderful richness. On top of all of this, my father got involved in politics and the volunteer firemen. My mother became a pink lady in the hospital. And when it came to the Memorial Day parade, my whole family marched. I marched with the school, my brother with his clarinet in the middle school, my mother with the pink ladies, and my father with the volunteer firemen. This was such a different life that we could never possibly have imagined in the Bronx. Even if the demographics hadn't changed, there wasn't this richness of culture. It was just amazing. Let me see what else. The schools were excellent. We were entering the David Salton years, and at that time, the Long Beach schools were considered number 2 in New York State. That's pretty good. And so that was another wonderful thing. And the schools were great. And there was a social life. There was no social life in the Bronx. You met people after school. You went to football games. It was a whole wonderful existence. The rec center offered entertainment for children, and there were summer programs as well, and swimming at the municipal pool. Let me see. Okay. I was saying 3 years after we moved here, we all marched in the Memorial Day parade. This was the most amazing thing. The warmth, the friendships. The families made friendships, and it was a very Jewish experience, and it was kind of special. So, thank you.
Okay, Jared, you're on.
I got very comfortable in this chair. Forgive me, I've been moving since early this morning.
Everybody goes slowly.
My name is Jerry Kremer, and this is, to me, is like old home night, if you will. Or probably the best way to describe it is a walk down memory lane. But I've lived in Long Beach, if you will. First of all, I do have to say this because I did serve and represent you for 23 years in Albany, from 1966 to 1990 when I left the legislature. And then the first time in history, somebody older than me became the Assemblyman. And that's my friend Harvey, who was kind enough, not older by much, I don't want to stigmatize him, you know. But it's very kind of Harvey to come out. I said, Harvey, I want you to come out tonight. He said, it's cold. I said, I want you to come out tonight. So Harvey was kind enough to come, and he showed me the display downstairs. He was kind enough to put one of my pictures up in the corner, but I told him in that picture, it looks like I've already gone to the great beyond. I think we have to get a better picture. In any event, you know, when Jeannie called me and said that she wanted to talk about my Jewish history in Long Beach, first of all, I couldn't turn you down, okay? Because I'm going to go going back to Manhattan tonight. But I really wanted to come back, if you will, and talk a little bit about what I didn't do a thing. This community meant to my upbringing and to, you know, I would even say to this point of where I am in life. We came to Long Beach in 1948, and I think I was about 12 or 13. Like a lot of other people, there was no air conditioning, and of course Long Beach had the ocean. So for a lot of people, the ocean was, you know, needless to say, the place that everybody wanted to be. And so we rented a house. Okay, I'll move away. We rented an apartment on East Chester Street, 26 East Chester. My mother and dad liked it so much that the following year we bought a home at 141 East Walnut Street. Lived in there for a number of years. Actually, in those days, you never left the house until you got married. So you stayed there, you know, indefinitely, if you will, until you found the right person. I like to think of, there's just so many things at Long Beach. I didn't go to high school here, oddly enough. I have no idea why. I came to Long Beach in my second year of high school, and I was in high school in Queens, and for some silly reason, I went to that school for the final 2 years, but all the people I talked to, like Bobby Wolkenberg down in Florida, and a lot of other people, everybody thinks I went to Long Beach High School, and I don't want to make them feel bad, so I passed on the subject, if you will. When I left high school, in those early years, I worked for the Long Beach Independent, the Long Beach Life, the Nassau Star, wrote for all those papers. I'm still writing now for the Herald now for 23 years. I have a column that appears there frequently. I was assistant corporation counsel. I became the corporation counsel in 1962. In 1965, I had an opportunity to run for the state assembly. I got elected 13 times. I had the good fortune to become the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, which is the best job in Albany. Anybody will tell you the speaker is a good job. No. The guy who handles the money is the guy who has the best job. And I had the good fortune to have that job for 12 years. And then I got into a contest for the speakership, which I lost because I forgot about history. History was that all the speakerships over the years all went to Brooklyn. So I lost out in a contest with a gentleman from Brooklyn. A lot of good things happened to me. My mother, Dorothy, was very active at Long Beach Hospital, Hadassah, NCJW. organization after organization. My dad had a grocery store at New York and Beach Street, which is where we spent my law school years and my college years on weekends, working with my father and my mom in the grocery store. There's always, I'll just tell a short thing before, I'm not going to forget about the Jewishness, Rabbi, I know that's why I'm here. But in fact, I asked Jeannie, what's the title tonight? She said, I thought she said Jews in Long Beach. It sounded like one of those a sci-fi movie. You know? So in any event, my mother was extremely active in almost everything. My dad was a hardworking guy. Both of them came from Romania, and my father when he was 21, my mother when she was 18. And so I'm technically a first-generation American. I had the good fortune to serve in state government. I left state government learning a lot about people. When you're a state legislator, one of the things you know is you know where all the synagogues are. You know, if I wanted to do Jewish geography, it starts out with Lido Beach when they had the Lido Beach Jewish Center on Lido Boulevard. And then you had Temple Beth Shalom, which was my first synagogue that I belonged to when I had my two daughters, Nora and Robin, who both went to all the local schools. And then we moved further west, and we had Temple Israel, and Rabbi Mann was the rabbi at that particular time. And then there was the Bach, and there was Simon Solomon, who was technically the rabbi of it, although he was not a rabbi. And then, of course, there was Young Israel of Long Beach. My connection with Young Israel is that the rabbi there at the time wanted to have an Eruv for the city of Long Beach. I don't know how many people you know what an Eruv is, okay. And my job was to get the Eruv for the city, which is a piece of string or cord or whatever it might be, that it basically covers an area of the beach that allows mothers on Saturdays to walk with baby carriages, and you're allowed to carry something. And so my job was to get the Eruv for the city of Long Beach. And first of all, I said to him, what is an Eruv? And then he finally educated me on what an Eruv is. And then the first place we would go to was the Long Island Lighting Company, because between the Long Island Lighting Company and the telephone company, they had all the poles. So there was no way to get an Eruv unless you got the permission of the lighting company and New York Telephone Company to put wire on theirs. And then the next problem was to get city council approval. At that time, most of the members of the city council didn't care whether there was an Eruv or not. If anything, they said, if we put up an Eruv, those people are going to come in larger numbers because they feel that that's where they want to be, where there's an Eruv. So in any event, that was Young Israel. And then we got to Temple Bethel. Well, Temple Israel was Cantor Kaplow, whose three daughters, in fact, I knew a number of the daughters, up to three, who I've gotten to see from time to time over the years. The story about Temple Israel, when we lived at 141 East Walnut Street, Temple Israel, of course, was the place to go, all the machers, if you will. The most important people were at Temple Israel. And two of the people who disliked each other was Phil Cohen, who davened on this side, and Teddy Ornstein, who had Central Federal Bank. Teddy prayed on that wall, if you will, but the two would never, under any circumstances, come together. In fact, their dispute was so bitter that the Granada grocery store, or Granada pharmacy, which was on the corner, I think, of, is it National? Yeah, National Boulevard, that when Phil Cohen came into the Granada and said, I want a crumb bum, he would refer to Ornstein as a crumb bum. That was the relationship between the two of them. But in any event, Israel was, of course, one of the places. But I joined the Bach. And the Bach, which was mentored by Simon Solomon, was an interesting place, as you indicated. I thought I'm being raised.
Be careful.
Okay, I will. I'll try not to get too close. The Bach was an interesting place because it didn't have a rabbi, but young people like myself were taught how to read from the Torah. Now, in order to read from the Torah, you had to have a book which was known as a tikkun. And the tikkun was a book which replicated the entire Torah, but it had no vowels underneath it. So you really had to memorize looking at the tikkun before you performed on a Saturday. And I was like one of these regulars who would come on Saturday and read from the Torah, but in effect trained by Simon Solomon. And I'll talk a little bit later about that, the indelible effect it had on my life. As you went west, you had Rabbi Abatan's Sephardic temple, if you will, and then you had Temple Bethel. The then rabbi was Rabbi Kolach, and the cantor was Cantor Brun, right? Herb Brun. I remember that I dated his niece, and he was pushing me at age 16 to marry his niece, and I felt it was a little bit early. In those days, by the way, if you weren't married by you were 21, people questioned as to whether, what's wrong with him? He's not married, he's 21. In any event, we got to the West End, and you had Temple Zion, and the president at the time was Leon Jasper, who was a great, great marketer for Temple Zion. He really worked hard to let people know that in the West End of Long Beach, that there was in fact a temple there. Most people couldn't imagine, because they knew that there was St. Ignatius, if you will, and I knew St. Ignatius well because as a kid working in my father's store, I would deliver groceries to the rectory. In later years, many of the priests that I met and became friendly with also became higher up in the hierarchy of the Catholic Church. So, I made friends who advanced, if you will, who became bishops and everything, who all started in St. Ignatius. What was most significant about Long Beach was that the large number of synagogues that it had at one particular time, which was really reflective of the fact that we had an extremely large Jewish population. Now, those synagogues, by and large, were all well attended and well supported, and each and every one of them had mentors or an individual mentor who really kept them going. So that Long Beach, for a long period of time, had all of these synagogues. And of course, the demographics of communities change. And needless to say, as people moved to Florida, and moved away, and in certain instances passed on, then you had this whole change. I didn't mean to leave out Temple Emanu-El. That was Cantor Barton.
Cantor Barton.
That's right. There's a connection with that because I currently belong to Central Synagogue in Manhattan, and he was the cantor there before he went out west. Am I right? Fran, you're the experts. You know better. But it is interesting how times have changed. Over a period of years, Temple Beth Shalom, when Rabbi Miller passed away, Amos Miller, actually when he retired, they got a rabbi temporarily to, if you will, preside over the congregation. But it was no longer the same. And the thing that was fascinating to me, there was this beautiful gray stone building, which was housed Temple Beth Shalom, and both my daughters were confirmed my older daughters were confirmed in Beth Shalom, but there was no community support, and no group came forward to save the synagogue. I mean, there's this gorgeous, gorgeous building, gray stone building, just as beautiful inside, and they had a facility across the street for the Hebrew school. But over a period of time, all the people who were associated with the temple, no individual group came forward to try to save the synagogue. And the saddest part was, it's not a statistic, but I learned in subsequent years that the builder who built the homes down there tore down the building on Rosh Hashanah, the first day of Rosh Hashanah. So, which was a very sad commentary. Now, I want to go back to the Bach. The Bach really was a place that really educated me about, the joys of the liturgy, the joys of the cantor, the joys of all the different things that I learned. It really sort of was the foundation of what my life is now going forward. Sometimes now, when in a still busy life, at 6 o'clock at night, I turn on your TV. If you get on your laptop, and you use a laptop and you go to Central Synagogue. For 1 hour, it's the most beautiful, beautiful service you can imagine, with a cantorial group, if you will, plus a professional music group. So it's really a very spectacular experience that really runs from about 6 o'clock till about 7:15 at night. And a lot of times my wife says to me, you know, we have a dinner reservation. I said, when the service is over, I said, okay, we'll go to our dinner reservation. But I really try not to miss it as often as I can, because it's really a beautiful service. And you will notice, if you look at the bottom of the screen, that people are watching it in Brazil and Peru and all these places around the world. So I'm not trying to take away from any existing synagogue in Long Beach, but I'm saying it's a nice experience if you just want to try it out. But Long Beach really, for a long period of time, was very blessed with a large and significant Jewish population. And the demographics of the community have changed, and it's become much more mixed, because what's happened, if you will, as people leave here and the homes become, more homes become available, you get a bigger mix, if you will, in population. Was there ever any anti-Semitism in my time in Long Beach? Really not at all. I mean, the relationships that we built up over the years with, whether it was Irish or Italian or everything, these are relationships that we have almost for a lifetime. The Nicolosi and the Laspina families in Long Beach, John, who I talk to frequently, calls me Uncle Jerry. So John is 67 years of age, so it's nice to be called Uncle Jerry by John. And his son Joey also calls me Uncle Jerry. But you know, Long Beach really was a great inspiration to a lot of people who want to enjoy the experience, if you will, of having synagogues with great rabbis, great cantors, great, if you will, and each and every one of them in its own way contributed something to the community. Rabbi Abaton always used to say, please come, you know, and spend a Saturday morning with me. And Rabbi Kolach at Temple Bethel would say the same thing, please spend a Saturday morning with me. And so it was always interesting. There's one great mystery that I never was able to solve. Temple Israel was a very, very strong, I wouldn't say orthodox, but a very, very strong, very, very religious institution. And I could never figure out how on a Saturday afternoon at 4 o'clock somebody would tell you during the World Series that the score was 5-6 when everybody in the place was Jewish and there was no one else. But somehow I think the guy who worked in the basement was not, and he had a radio, and this is how we got the World Series scores. But it was always the great mystery, how in the middle of a long service that was going on and on and on, the whispering would go, the Yankees are winning 5-4. So there are miracles that take place in synagogues as well as in Catholic churches and everything. But Long Beach, if you will, it has really been a great mosaic, if you will, of religious institutions. And really, much to its credit, there has always been this great, good relationship, if you will, with the Catholic churches, if you will, and the Jewish synagogues. When it came to having days, you know, or events, if you will, which involved, you know, bringing all the religions together, Long Beach always worked that way. Long Beach observes the Holocaust every year, Kristallnacht, in some way or some fashion. I know because I gave them the money to put up a monument. I think it's from the city hall, right? Okay. It was your taxpayers' money, so I just wanted. But you know, just basically, I can only say that, you know, Long Beach, if you will, was a great melting pot, and it continues to be that, and it's nice to come back.
First, I'd like to thank the Long Beach Historical Society and the Long Beach Library for hosting this event. I am definitely the new kid on the block. I did not come to Long Beach until 2016. And so I want to share with you a little bit of my journey, how I got here, and sort of my perception of taking the information of these beautiful renditions of the early history of the Jewish community in Long Beach and sort of what's going on sort of now as I perceive it. But first I want to also welcome all of my Temple Emanu-El people who are here. And there's really a lot of... And no, this does not mean you don't have to come to services Friday night. So, for those actually in my temple, you may have heard the story before, but for those who don't know, I want to briefly tell you a little bit about myself and how I ended up here. I am honored to be the 7th full-time rabbi at Temple Emanu-El. My parents were Holocaust survivors, came from Poland. They were the sole survivors of their families, liberated from Auschwitz. I'm going to be speaking at the Nassau County International Holocaust Remembrance Day on Monday the 27th, a little bit more about their story. And so they came to this country in 1949. They had 4 children, 3 sisters and myself, and I was given a very, and grateful for, a very intense Jewish education. Holocaust survivors had different responses to their experience. My parents, they believed that they had an obligation to do what they could to ensure the continuity of the faith of the people, to try to undo what Hitler tried to do. And so I went to Orthodox yeshivas, and I was groomed to be a rabbi from 1st grade on, and in Brooklyn. And so I embraced that Jewish education, and come to the end of the journey as I was in this very intense Orthodox rabbinical seminary, I came to the conclusion that I myself was not going to really embrace fully Orthodoxy. I wasn't going to be fully Sabbath observant, and I couldn't take an Orthodox pulpit and be authentic. And so I went to law school. I went to Vermont Law, graduated law school, and ended up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, of all places. And I was there for 30 years. While I was in Tulsa, I was an assistant DA for a number of years, opened up my own law practice for a while, was a professor of law at the University of Tulsa College of Law for a number of years, was named to be the chief public defender of Tulsa County, all the while being extremely active in the Jewish community in Tulsa, president of a 500-family conservative synagogue in Tulsa, as well as on the board of every Jewish organization, filling in for the rabbis when they were sick. And then, as my parents were getting elderly and retired to Florida, I decided to go back to New York, parlay the education that I had already received, and get ordained in a non-Orthodox seminary. And so I went back to Tulsa, and I became the first rabbi of a new synagogue in Bentonville, Arkansas, which was the corporate headquarters of Walmart, the Walmart Jews. There was a New York Times article about that. It's a very interesting story there. The Waltons were, Sam Walton was known to be anti-Semitic. He built up the great Walmart chain. He passed away. His sons, who took over the corporation, were trained at the University of Chicago and other places, and they wanted the best and brightest at the corporate headquarters. All of a sudden, there were Jews in Northwest Arkansas, in the real estate department, in the legal department, and so on. And so a synagogue was built. I became their first rabbi. And I was there for about 7 years. Ultimately, I decided one day to say yes to performing a wedding in Nova Scotia. A friend of mine's daughter was getting married in Canada, and I said yes, I would go to this destination wedding. And I decided to drive from Oklahoma to Canada. Yes, I had recently gotten divorced, my son went off to college, I had never taken any time off, so I took a multiple-week drive through the South, and the way I did geography, New York was on the way to Canada. Well, it was. So I stopped to visit my sister, who lives in Island Park. And that's how I ended up here. So she was a member of Temple Israel. So the connecting the dots, hearing Temple Israel in many of your stories really resonates with me because that's sort of my link to why I stand before you today. So I came to Island Park for a long weekend, and at that time Temple Israel did not have a rabbi. She had mentioned to some of the people there I was coming, and their president asked me, would I please lead services Shabbat morning at Temple Israel? And I said it would be an honor to, and I did. And after that weekend, Temple Israel asked me if I would be their guest rabbi for High Holidays. Would I lead High Holiday services in 2015? And I said yes. And so I led High Holiday services here in Long Beach. I had never heard of Long Beach before I got here. I thought that was in California. I was raised in Brooklyn and really didn't know much about Long Island. And after leading services for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur at Temple Israel, there was a discussion about a merger between Temple Emanu-El and Temple Israel. And the leadership of both synagogues approached me and said, you know, Temple Israel was without a rabbi at the time. Temple Israel was without a rabbi at the time. And if we merged, we think you would be a good fit based on your traditional background and your modern and liberal side as well. You'd be a perfect match. Well, my resume wasn't out. I wasn't looking to come back to New York, but you know, God works in mysterious ways. I had a rabbi mentor say that coincidence is God tapping you on the shoulder. It's up to you if you want to turn around. And so I said, sure, I would consider that. But many of you might know that that merger did not take place for any number of reasons. And it was okay. I had my life in Tulsa, and I thought it was not meant to be. But shortly after learning that the merger was not going to go forward, Temple Emanu-El called me and said, you know, we would like you to consider being the rabbi just for Temple Emanu-El. So in 2016, I led High Holidays as my audition, and I've been here ever since. And so it's truly a pleasure to be involved in the Jewish community in Long Beach. And I have really seen and felt the trajectory that all of you have described. I have heard from my congregants and from others about how dense the Jewish population was here, and how all the synagogues were full, and there was no need to recruit members, the pews were full. But the demographics did change. You were right, Jerry. People moved to Florida, people moved to the North Shore, people passed away. And so the Jewish population got smaller, and synagogues began to struggle. And thankfully, Temple Emanu-El is doing quite well. We keep adding new members. We're vibrant and robust. But I will tell you, it's a beautiful tapestry. Temple Israel, I think, represents the conservative movement, sort of that in between Orthodoxy and Reform. Temple Emanu-El is the only Reform temple on the Barrier Island, and the rest are Orthodox. And so I want to share with you not just the diversity of Long Beach in terms of all of the demographics of various peoples, but also the diversity within and among the Jewish denominations. We come together not often enough. The barriers are there, but we continue to strive to support one another, to look for ways of commonality. Rabbi Goodman and I do many things together. We have a very good relationship, but I also want us to stop and pause and think about where we are today in the historical timeline. We're actually, I think, in the middle of a renaissance. During COVID, things, of course, were very difficult. But because of that, we saw a migration for the first time of Jewish people to Long Beach. People from dense populations like Manhattan and in the boroughs and in Connecticut started moving to Long Beach during COVID. And so we have a new opportunity. We have a new era a new possibility of another golden age of the Jewish community in this beautiful city by the sea. And so I feel very honored and privileged to be here in this moment to join all of you in making that dream come true. Thank you.
Okay, does anyone else want to contribute or ask questions or share? Yes. Great teacher.
I just wanted to add the role that the Hebrew Academy has had as a beacon for a lot of Jewish families. At one time, we had the whole community was there. Over the years, the population moved to the 5 towns, and sadly, we had to move as well. However, the principal, Richard Alderby, the head of school, Adam Englander, are all HALB students who came from here. So HALB has had a very important role, and people all over the world now who are HALB students still feel that Long Beach is where they're, we call it, Yeshivat Lev, the heart, and it is the heart of Long Beach. So I just wanted to add that.
Very, very good, thank you. Right. Okay, anyone else? Yes. Yes.
I don't need a mic. I don't need a mic. First of all, I know, Mr. Ehrlich, you and I lived on the same block at the same time. And Mr. Kremer, you helped my mother with my brother. I have an older brother that's intellectually disabled. And I was a member of Temple Israel. And he's 76. And he was bar mitzvah. My father owned a bakery at the time by the name of Chalet Bakers, so the entire town of Long Beach showed up for this bar mitzvah because they called it mentally retarded at the time, but he was high functioning, and it was Temple Israel, which was conservative leaning towards Orthodox, all right? And instead of being at age 13, it was age 15. And I called him Rabbi Klausner. He might have been a teacher, I don't know. I remember Kaplau. My mother bought the album that he made with the other cantors. And the entire town of Long Beach showed up for my brother's bar mitzvah at age 15. He's 76, he can still read Hebrew, all right? And I just wanted to tell you, that's how, and there wasn't a dry eye in the temple, all right? Because, remember, 76 years ago, at that time, there was no services. And Mr. Kremer, my mother called Mr. Kremer for help, and you helped her. I will never forget that. So that is the strength of the Jewish population in Long Beach. Because I've always felt, because I was raised here, that I lived a sheltered life. Because you move out of Long Beach, and you're Jewish, and you're not in the same population. You don't have all that community with you. So I lived a sheltered life, but I kept coming back, all right? So I just wanted to thank Mr. Kremer, Mr. Ehrlich, that you and I were neighbors. And yes, the strength of Temple Israel and the Judaism in this town is still really the same. It may not be just as populated, but it's still there. It's still here. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else want to share? Yes, Lisa.
I have a question for Jerry. You mentioned that the 2 gentlemen who sat on opposite sides of the synagogue, what was their beef? Can you explain why they hated each other?
The question was, the 2 gentlemen were sat on opposite sides of the synagogue. And by the way, they had large prayer cloths, taluses. And they covered themselves up with it, so one could not look at the other and didn't have to, although the beamer occasionally got in the way. So. But apparently the beef was, the question became Teddy Ornstein had been mayor of Long Beach back in the late 30s into the 40s. And they did away with the mayor form of government. We had a city manager. We no longer had a mayor. So Ornstein was, if you will, constantly trying to regain his stature, if you will, politically, and Phil Cohen had no intention of allowing him to regain his stature politically. So the result of which they sat in the same synagogue, 2 different walls, never looked at each other, covered up during the service, and that was it. And the rivalry continued on both of them left this planet.
Okay, there was another question in the back, thank you.
Hi.
Do you want
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm good. All right, I'll speak up. I think this was a great event. I'm really glad to have come here and learned of the history here in Long Beach. I think it would be remiss not to mention an important event. Ricky's on the Holocaust Committee, and it was really great to hear more about who you are and your background and your upbringing. So another reason I'm glad I came. The Holocaust Committee was founded in 1982, and you can chime in and just take over from here, because Dr. Stanley Robbins, who was the cardiologist for Schindler, was quite upset about the anti-Semitism and vandalism the graffiti that was on the Lido Beach Synagogue and on several homes in Long Beach. So, it was with Dr. Stanley Robbins and several other important people. I believe Harvey Wiesenberg was very much one of those extremely important people, the pillar to this committee. And in 1987, it took 5 years, the monument was made, the only private paid monument for the Holocaust on public property. And it was a huge event. There were dignitaries, 1980s, and please fill in and take over.
On this holiday, we had 4 people. I gave, well, there was $4,000 to maintain and take care of it. That, you know, people in Long Beach today had no idea how did this thing end up in front of City Hall. It's the only one on public property that exists. Is this, and it's a tribute not only to the Jewish people, but all those who suffered from the German, none of the Nazis that took place in the world. But everybody, it's a symbol for children, for Jewish people, non-Jewish people, but it's a symbol about all religion and people who live and work together. And it doesn't exist anywhere else, I don't think, in this country.
There's the non-religious upstanders. The monument is truly a beautiful.
And the first name you look is Robbins, right there.
Yes.
And I'm out there, and it's funny, I say a prayer every morning and every night. I thank God for what I had and what I have.
I think Colby is one of the sides of the monument. So thank you.
Thank you for mentioning that.
Not too much.
Okay, someone else?
Yeah, I'll try to speak
Kevin.
up. So, hi, I'm Kevin Kelly. I live in Atlantic Beach. You can tell from my name, probably I'm not a Jew, but my step-family, I'll speak louder. My step-family is, so I know something about Jewish ritual and Jewish history. This is really enlightening, because I didn't know much about Long Beach's Jewish history, and so it's some beautiful stories tonight. I thank people for sharing them. So you probably know that Atlantic Beach is a controversy regarding Chabad. So it seems to me it's not a hidden fact that a number of the Jews in Atlantic Beach are opposed to Chabad coming for reasons that vary. I'm wondering what the experience is in Long Beach with Chabad, whether it's an ecumenical thing, everybody gets along, or are there tensions in the different, you spoke about political tensions among the different synagogues. Does that prevail with Chabad as well? I'd like Chabad to be able to be welcomed into AB and maybe have some people's suspicions and prejudices allayed about the nature of the organization. Can anybody speak to that?
Yeah, let me give you a comment, okay?
Yep.
I don't think we'll The Chabad is a very interesting group in that you can travel anywhere. I mean, I was in the south of France last year, I think in October, and there was a woman who was in the group that we were with who was Orthodox, and she wanted challah for the weekend, okay? And we were in the town, we were 10 minutes from the town of Avignon, and in Avignon, behind this walled city, was a Chabad. And so she found the Chabad rabbi. he proceeded to bake 2 challah breads for her so she'd have it for the weekend. What's fascinating about them, and we could always get into a debate about it, but they are the only group that markets throughout the world about, if you will, being a Jew, okay? They will stop you on the street in Manhattan and ask you if you put on a tefillin, and if you've told them that you've done it before, they still won't let you go. But if you will, they are the greatest mass marketers of any group that I ever seen. There may be other non-Jewish groups, if you will, who do their own mass marketing. But you will find Chabad groups, you'll find a Chabad rabbi in some town in Thailand. You'll find them in East Hampton. You'll find them in Southampton. They're trying to start a synagogue now in Sag Harbor. But what was fascinating is that they are today the greatest mass marketers of the Jewish religion anywhere in the world. And wherever you will go, I don't know about Dubai or Saudi Arabia, but I can vouch for the fact that they are very much can be found all over the world doing the same thing, asking you to participate in the Jewish religion and take advantage of it. So they're really a fascinating group. And by the way, are they aggressive? Absolutely. Are they good neighbors? Unquestionably, they are all good neighbors, if you will. I always get very concerned. With these disputes about synagogues and people locating places, I just remember that in the 60s, the first thing I learned about Garden City was that for 15 years, they're trying to establish a synagogue in Garden City, but the local neighbors fought it all the time. They're really not bad neighbors, if you will. There's always a fear that when Chabad comes, that more ultra-Orthodox people will come, but I can't really deal with that because I'm not going to talk about one Jewish group being anti another Jewish group. That's a dispute I'm not going to get in the middle of.
Okay, one more?
I just wanted to add a little bit about the Chabad. Again, I'm not sophisticated politically in any way. I'm just this ordinary kid who grew up in Long Beach. But I would say about Chabad the same thing I said about my Rabbi Rotman when I was 13 years old. Your heart knows, if you know how to read people, and I've always been good at reading people, I know when someone's genuine. And from the time I was a little kid and had I didn't even hear about Chabad when I was a little kid. The first time I heard about Chabad was when I was in college. And I was up in Brockport. There was no Judaism there for me at all. There were no temples. There was nothing. And I met a Chabad rabbi who used to drive from Rochester to Brockport to our school every week to study with us. And then he would invite some of us to his home for Shabbat. And these people just really believe in what they're doing at Chabad. So I know there'll always be some opinions, as you alluded to, Mr. Kremer. There'll always be politics and neighbors that, local residents who think they're bringing something negative to the community. But my experience for 50 years now with Chabad has been the opposite. They're all genuine people who just want Jewish people to get in touch with their Judaism. They've never forced anything on me. I can come dressed the way I want to. My wife can come dressed the way she wants to. It's just a completely open, inviting, and comforting way to get in better touch with your Judaism. That's my personal experience.
Thank you.
Rabbi Goodman from the Chabad used to come all the time to my daughter's house and teach my grandsons to lay tefillin. And he did this out of the goodness of his heart. And they would then come to some kind of Sabbath breakfast with all kinds of cakes and lox and bagels. And when the Sandy storm hit, the Chabad synagogue went out of their way to find out who needed what. They were getting refrigerators for people whose refrigerators floated away. They were very caring and very kind. And additionally, I was walking down the street in Connecticut wearing a Jewish star, and a Chabad rabbi gave me a challah because it's Shabbat and you should have a challah. So I have only good things to say about them.
Okay, one more gentleman.
With nothing to do about the Chabad, I would be remiss. My name is Judge Corey Klein. I think I'm the only elected official in Long Beach nowadays after Harvey. And I never know whether it's Arthur, Jerry, my grandmother's said it was Jerry in Long Beach, it was Arthur outside of Long Beach, and I always had to call you Mr. Kremer.
Let me tell you a strange fact of life. It's Jerry, but when you came to vote, it said Arthur J. But upstate legislators think that if you call somebody like Jerry, it's a nickname, it's like a mob name, you know. So I was Arthur to them, and to everybody downstate, I was Jerry.
Thank you very much for asking that. I just wanted to say thank you very much for the library. Mrs. Meschenberg was also my teacher at Howe, and for me being here, I look around, I feel like a young kid again. I used to sit in Temple Israel with my grandmother, okay? Because for me, I grew up here in Long Beach my whole life, and my family also. And all the stories that I heard here today, I just wanted to thank everybody for sharing all the stories, which brought me back, okay, to the days of going to Hebrew Academy, then to Long Beach High School, listening to all of these stories, knowing Mr. Weisberg, knowing Mr. Dodd, knowing all the history of Long Beach, okay? And for me, so now I'm 57, but I feel like hearing all these stories, I'm back being a little kid again, okay? And being able, so thank you everybody very much.
Okay, one more comment?
I just like to say that I did not grow up in Long Beach, I grew up in the United Kingdom. But when I moved to Long Beach, because one of my closest friends brought me here, I worked for 30 years in the hospital, and I feel it would be remiss not to mention that the hospital in Long Beach was founded by a lot of Jewish people in the area. When I first came here and worked in the hospital here, I was so impressed that they had a pure Halim, and that these ladies would come every Friday, and all the Jewish patients were well attended by volunteers. And people like Harvey Wiesenberg and all his family were so instrumental in so many different ways in this town that I just feel that nobody mentioned that, and they would be really remiss not to. And that all my children were blessed to have Mrs. Meschenberg as their teacher, and I thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing. Just as an aside, and to your point, we wanted to do a panel at the museum about the hospital, because we've done panel talks about policemen, firemen, teachers, but and merchants, but I couldn't get people from the hospital who've been here for a long time. So if you would like to share and be part of a panel at the hospital, of the hospital, history of the hospital, or just
in the history of the hospital,
yeah.
I think that the Lefkowitz family and certainly the Commonwealth family
See me later, okay?
were very instrumental.
They were.
And Hannah herself was so ahead of her time as a woman, not just in philanthropy but also in politics.
Right.
That it was just remarkable.
The way the hospital was formed
Yes.
was really quite amazing. So, all right, thank you all for coming. Thank you to our speakers. You were all fabulous, by the way, really. Okay, anyone else? Okay.
Thanks to Jeannie.
Oh,
Yeah, Jeannie!